I didn't cry anymore, not the way I used to. Somewhere along the way, I learned how to hurt quietly, how to tuck my sadness into corners where no one could see it. The house stayed clean, the food warm, the routine polished. To everyone else, we looked like a perfectly normal couple. But Leonardo? He had this way of making me feel invisible while pretending I was adored. And when he strayed, again and again, he'd say things like, "You'll never find anyone better than me." Like that was supposed to comfort me. Sometimes I believed him. Or maybe I was just too tired to believe in anything else. I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. She looked so capable, so put together, but inside I felt hollow. I told myself I was staying for the sake of our daughter, for the house, for stability. But the truth? I was scared. Scared of failing, scared of being alone, scared that maybe, just maybe, he was right, and I wasn't worth more. Then came that evening. I was picking up Maya's toys in the living room, lost in thought, when I felt her tug on my sleeve. Just a gentle touch, like she didn't want to interrupt. She looked up at me with those big brown eyes and asked, "Mommy, why are you always sad when you think no one's looking?" I swear my heart didn't just crack, it collapsed. That one question cut through every excuse I'd ever made. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. For the first time in years, I couldn't lie to myself. I didn't answer her right away. How could I? What do you say when your child sees through the armor you've spent years perfecting? I knelt beside her and held her face in my hands, trying to smile. But I saw it, the worry behind her innocence, the way her little fingers reached for mine like she was the one trying to comfort me. That's when I realized something terrifying. My sadness wasn't invisible. It was teaching her something I never meant to pass down. She was only 8, but children have this way of knowing the truth, don't they? No matter how gentle our lies, they feel what we bury. I thought I was protecting her by staying, keeping the family together, shielding her from the chaos. But in that moment, I saw what I'd really been doing. Showing her a version of love that came with pain, silence, and pretending. And that terrified me more than any lonely night ever could. Because if I stayed, she'd think this was normal. I tucked her into bed that night and watched her sleep, her little hands curled into fists, like she was still holding on to me even in her dreams. And I just stood there, completely still. Because somewhere deep inside me, a part of me was waking up, the part I'd buried under all the fear and compromise. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have answers. But I did have a question echoing in my mind now, just like hers. Why am I always sad when no one's looking? And suddenly, not knowing wasn't enough anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed beside Leonardo, listening to his breathing, feeling the distance between us stretch like a canyon. He turned away, as he always did, and I stared at the ceiling, eyes wide open, heart pounding. Not with fear this time, but with something else. A question, a spark, a quiet knowing. What if my daughter deserved a version of me that wasn't always hurting? What if I did too? I thought about the woman I used to be, before him. God, she was bold. She laughed without apologizing. She had plans. She believed in her own worth. Somewhere along the way, I handed pieces of her away, thinking love meant sacrifice, thinking endurance was strength. But looking at Maya's little face, I realized she doesn't need a mother who survives. She needs one who lives, one who shows her that love should feel safe, not small. That night, something shifted. I didn't make any big moves. I didn't pack a bag or slam a door. But inside me, the ground began to move. Something cracked open. It wasn't a decision yet, not quite. But it was a beginning. Because when your own child holds up a mirror to your pain, you can't look away forever. And whether I was ready or not, I knew the question had been asked, and now I had to find the answer. That night, after Maya fell asleep, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, just staring. I touched my face like I was trying to recognize it. Not the makeup or the lines that time left behind, but me, the woman I used to be. I could still see her in there, buried under layers of compromise and quiet suffering. She hadn't vanished. She'd just gone silent. And suddenly, I missed her. God, I missed her so much. Before Leonardo, I was full of life. I danced barefoot in the kitchen, I read books just because they made me feel something, and I dreamed out loud. I was ambitious, fierce even. But somewhere along the way, I dimmed my own light to make space for his shadow. Every time he cheated and told me I was lucky he stayed, I believed a little less in myself. And every time I forgave him, it wasn't because I trusted him. It was because I doubted me. I started thinking about all the things I'd given up in the name of love. Friendships I let fade, job offers I declined, opinions I swallowed, and all the times I looked the other way, just to keep the peace. But there's no peace in losing yourself, is there? There's only numbness. A slow, quiet erosion of who you are. I didn't leave him back then because I was afraid I couldn't survive alone. But that night, looking at my reflection, I saw something terrifying. I wasn't surviving with him either. I sat on the bathroom floor for what felt like hours, knees pulled to my chest, the cool tiles pressing against my skin. And in that stillness, a truth began to rise. Not loud, but steady. If I stay, Maya will grow up thinking love looks like this. A woman shrinking. A home built on silence. Smiles that don't reach the eyes. And I couldn't stand the thought of her mistaking survival for happiness. Of her thinking that this was what a mother should look like when she loves. She watches me more than I realized. The way I bite my lip when I'm anxious. The way I move quickly to clean up his messes. Not just around the house, but in conversation, in mood, in energy. And I wondered what she was learning. That love means disappearing? That kindness means swallowing your voice? That being a woman means enduring until there's nothing left? No. No. I couldn't let her carry that forward like some inherited curse. And then I thought about her future, the woman she'd become. One day, someone might hurt her. Someone might try to convince her she's not enough. And if I stayed in this, what would I have taught her? To accept it? To make herself smaller, quieter, more obedient? That night, I didn't have a roadmap, but I did have a promise. I wouldn't let my daughter confuse pain with love, and to do that, I had to stop doing it myself. I went to bed that night with my heart pounding, but not from fear, from awareness. Like something inside me had shifted into place, quietly but firmly. I didn't tell Leonardo. He kissed me on the cheek, distracted, already half asleep, and I just watched him. I wondered how many years I'd spent trying to make him love me better, when I should have been learning to love myself louder. For the first time in a long while, I didn't reach for his hand. I pulled the blanket tighter around my own body. That small gesture felt like the beginning of something. And in the darkness, I started remembering the woman I used to be. Not in pain, but with a kind of reverence. Like I was unearthing a version of myself I had once loved deeply. The one who laughed at her own jokes, the one who didn't apologize for taking up space. She was still there, somewhere beneath the layers of guilt and doubt and silence. And I was going to find her again, piece by piece, no matter how long it took. Because I wanted Maya to know that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "You deserve more." So I laid there, staring at the ceiling, no longer numb. I wasn't ready to leave yet, not physically. But emotionally, the first wall had cracked. And once that happens, you can't pretend it didn't. You can't unsee your own worth once it shows itself. Something inside me had been buried for so long, I'd forgotten how to feel it. But now that it was stirring again, I couldn't look away. Not for him. Not for fear. Not anymore. I started small. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Just little things, like texting an old friend from college I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name popped into my mind while I was making coffee, and without overthinking, I hit send. It felt strange at first, like I was reaching across a canyon I wasn't sure I could cross. But when she replied, warm, surprised, genuinely happy to hear from me, something flickered inside. I hadn't realized how much I missed being seen, just for who I was. Then came the resume. God, I stared at that blank document for hours, unsure of where to begin. It had been so long since I even thought about my own career, my own goals. But I opened my laptop anyway, fingers trembling slightly, and typed my name. Just that, Carla Mendez. And there it was, a beginning, a reminder that I wasn't just a wife or a mother or someone constantly trying to manage another person's chaos. I was still a woman with skills, with ambition, with value. I found a therapist online one afternoon while Leonardo was at work. My palms were sweating just making the call. I wasn't sure what I was even going to say. But when the receptionist answered, I heard myself ask for an appointment. Just like that. And after I hung up, I cried. Not from fear this time, but from a strange kind of relief. Like I was finally letting someone help me hold what I'd been carrying alone for so long. Quiet steps, yes. But every one of them felt like a crack of light through a locked door. I became meticulous, almost methodical, not out of paranoia, but out of purpose. I started keeping a folder, locked and hidden, filled with screenshots, emails, credit card statements. Every late-night message Leonardo thought I'd never see. Every hotel receipt he didn't bother hiding. I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was doing it for clarity. For the day I would need to look at the truth without flinching. The day I'd stop gaslighting myself into believing things weren't as bad as they felt. Each time I printed another page, I felt a strange mix of grief and strength. Grief for the years I'd given to a man who never really chose me. Strength because I was finally choosing myself. I found a lawyer through a woman in my therapy group. Quiet, brilliant, direct. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me like someone who had done this before, many times, and lived to tell. And in that first meeting when she said, "Whenever you're ready," I knew. I was getting close. At night, I read to Maya with more intention. Stories about brave girls and kind hearts, about finding your voice and standing your ground. And I watched her, how she leaned into me, how she laughed at the funny parts, how her breathing slowed when I whispered the last line. I wondered if she could sense it, the shift in me. I wasn't just reading anymore. I was becoming the kind of woman the heroines in those stories would look up to. And for the first time in a long time, I liked who I was becoming. During the day, I moved like a woman with secrets, not shameful ones, but sacred. I started taking long walks while Maya was at school, breathing in the air like I hadn't in years. I noticed things again, the rustle of trees, the smell of jasmine near the corner cafe, the way my shoulders finally sat a little lower, like the weight was beginning to lift. I wasn't free yet, but I was waking up to the idea that freedom was possible. That maybe I didn't have to ask for it. I could claim it. Leonardo hadn't noticed. Not really. He was too distracted, too used to my silence to realize it had started to carry a different tone. I no longer asked where he was going. I no longer flinched when he came home late. My power wasn't loud or confrontational. It was calm. And in that calm, I began to feel dangerous, in the best way. I was building something, slowly and carefully, like a woman preparing for a storm, But this time, not to survive it. To end it. The pieces were falling into place. I had support. I had proof. I had a plan. But more than that, I had something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. And while Leonardo made his usual plans for their upcoming anniversary, I was making mine too. Except mine didn't involve pretending. Mine involved truth. And this time, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. The morning of our anniversary felt still. Not peaceful, not quite, but intentional. I woke up before the sun, made coffee the way I like it, and watched the steam rise as I sat in silence. Leonardo was still asleep. His face looked soft, almost innocent, like he wasn't the man who had made me question my worth for over a decade. But I wasn't fooled anymore. That version of me, the one who needed his approval to feel enough, she didn't live here anymore. I dressed with care, not to impress him, but to remind myself of who I'd become. A fitted black blouse, dark jeans, my wedding ring left sitting on the dresser. He noticed, of course. Said I looked nice in that offhanded way he had. I nodded and smiled, saying thank you without letting the compliment settle. I wasn't hungry, but I made breakfast for Maya and packed her lunch with her favorite snacks. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "You smell happy today." And for the first time in years, I was. That evening, he had made dinner reservations, some upscale place we'd gone to once when we still pretended to like each other in public. He thought it would be like always, a performance. We'd smile for strangers, drink wine we couldn't pronounce, and ignore the hollow space between us. But I had other plans. I brought a folder in my bag, neatly labeled. Divorce papers, copies of emails, bank records. Everything he never thought I'd have the courage to hold, let alone hand over. He ordered for me, like he always did. Steak, medium well, as if I hadn't stopped eating red meat months ago. I didn't correct him. Let him play his part, one last time. The waiter poured the wine, and Leonardo launched into some rehearsed speech about reconnecting, about fresh starts, all with that charming smile he wore when he wanted something. I nodded, let him speak, my hands resting calmly on my lap. I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. I was just done. When the main course arrived, I reached into my bag. I didn't make a scene. No tears, no raised voice. I simply slid the folder across the table and watched his expression change. Slowly at first, then all at once. He flipped through the pages, his mouth tightening, eyes scanning for denial, for escape, for control. But there was none left to find. I took a sip of water, folded my hands, and waited. For the first time in our marriage, he was the one with nothing to say. And when he finally looked at me, stunned and pale, I met his gaze without blinking. "You always said no one else would love me," I said quietly. "But you forgot something important." I paused, not for effect, but because I wanted to feel the weight of the words I was about to say. "I already have someone who does. Maya. And now, I'm learning to love myself too." I didn't need applause. I didn't need his reaction. The power wasn't in what he did next. It was in what I had just done. He tried to speak, some blend of defense and disbelief, but I stood up before the excuses could take shape. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. Just finished. There's a silence that comes when a woman finally chooses herself. It's not cold. It's clean. I left the folder on the table, untouched steak cooling on my plate, and reached for my coat. He didn't follow me. Maybe for the first time, he understood that I wasn't bluffing, that the woman he thought would never leave had already gone. Outside, the night air was crisp. I walked to the car where Maya was waiting with my sister, her little face lighting up when she saw me. "Did you have a nice dinner?" she asked, kicking her feet from the back seat. I smiled and brushed her hair off her forehead. I did exactly what I needed to, I told her. She didn't ask more, and I didn't explain. She didn't need to know the details, only that I was different now, that the story was changing. I drove us home, to our home. A small apartment we had quietly rented 2 weeks earlier. The furniture was mismatched, the walls still bare, but it was peaceful in a way our house had never been. Maya curled up beside me on the couch, blanket pulled to her chin, and whispered, "I'm glad we're here." I kissed her temple, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to apologize for anything. I had walked away from a life that almost broke me, and for once, I wasn't looking back. The mornings feel different now. There's a softness to them, not because life is suddenly easy, but because it's finally mine. I wake up before Maya and brew coffee while the sun spills through our kitchen window, warming the chipped counter and mismatched mugs. The silence isn't heavy anymore. It's gentle, freeing. I play music while I cook breakfast. Nothing fancy, just eggs and toast. And I catch myself humming along. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I did that. Our little apartment is far from perfect, but it feels like home in a way the old house never did. I've started a small business from our living room, organizing home spaces for other women who feel buried under chaos. It's slow, humble work. But it's mine. Every client, every dollar earned, feels like a quiet declaration. I'm rebuilding. Not for anyone else, not to prove anything. Just because I finally believe I'm worth investing in. And I want Maya to grow up seeing that. Sometimes I catch her watching me, the same way she used to, but now with something softer in her eyes, like she sees me differently, like I see me differently. And one night, as we baked cookies, she looked up from the mixing bowl and said, "You smile more now, Mommy. You laugh out loud." I didn't even know what to say. My throat tightened, my hands stilled. All I could do was smile back at her, heart wide open. Because she was right. I had come back to life, and she had noticed. I pulled her into my arms, flour still on my hands, and kissed her forehead. "Because now I'm free," I whispered. "And I promise you, I'll never choose fear over joy again." She didn't respond with words, just wrapped her arms around my waist and held on, like she believed me, like she felt the difference. And I stood there in that tiny kitchen, holding my daughter, thinking about how far we'd come. Not just in distance, but in truth. Fear used to run my life. It told me I couldn't do better. That I wasn't enough. That leaving would break everything. But it was staying that nearly broke me. Now, when I look around, at the laundry basket on the floor, the shoes by the door, the sticky notes on the fridge, I don't see chaos. I see freedom. I see a life I'm choosing every single day. Not out of desperation, but out of hope, out of belief, and more than anything, out of love. It's not perfect. Some nights I still feel the ache of what I lost. There are bills, long days, and moments where I wonder if I'm getting it all right. But then I hear Maya laugh from the other room, or she calls out, "Mom, come see this." And I remember, I didn't just leave something behind. I walked toward something too. A version of life where love doesn't hurt, where I can breathe, where my daughter is safe. And I am too. Tonight, after Maya went to bed, I sat on the couch alone with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker through the window. No noise, no tension, just peace. I scrolled through the photos on my phone, landing on the one I took earlier. Me and Maya in the kitchen, covered in flour, mid-laugh, both of us looking completely alive. I stared at it for a moment, then opened a message to my lawyer, attached the photo, typed one simple line beneath it. This is what winning looks like, and it is. Not the kind of winning that comes with applause or spotlights, but the quiet, defiant kind, where you reclaim your voice, your name, your joy. where you stop surviving and start living, where you become the kind of mother, woman, and soul that your younger self would be proud of. I didn't get here overnight. It took pain. It took reckoning. It took a question from an 8-year-old that shattered my world and saved me. I still don't know what the future holds, but I know this. I will never again trade myself for the illusion of love. I will never again stay where I'm not seen, and I will raise my daughter to believe in joy, not fear, in strength, not silence. What stayed in the end wasn't pain or bitterness. It was love. Real love. The kind that holds your hand in the dark and says, "We're okay now." And finally, we are.
My name is Katrina Steele. I'm 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, the quiet tick of gears has been the soundtrack of my life. While other people found joy in noise and crowds, I found mine in silence and precision. My tiny workshop tucked away in the spare room of my apartment was more than just a workspace, it was my sanctuary. Daniel, my boyfriend of 6 years, used to call it my hobbit hole. He meant it as a joke, but I always liked the sound of it. That Friday night, while the city outside pulsed with neon and music, I was bent over a century-old trench watch, coaxing it back to life with patient hands. Every delicate click of the gears, every faint smell of oil and metal grounded me. This was where I belonged, where the world's chaos couldn't touch me. My phone buzzed on the workbench. Daniel's name lit up the screen. My lips curled into an automatic smile before I even answered. But his voice on the other end wasn't the warm tone I once knew. It was loud, sharp, and slurred, drowned in the echo of a bar and the shrill laughter of his friends. "Hey, Katrina," he drawled. His words stretched thin by alcohol. "What are you doing? Still hiding in your little cave with your toy watches?" I ignored the sting. "Just working. You sound busy." "Oh, just out with the guys," he said, laughter bursting through the receiver. "Talking about life futures, real ambition." I knew what was coming. I felt it in the pit of my stomach. His voice shifted from mocking to something colder. "We actually made a list," he said. "A list of all the things you don't have." The words hit me like a stone to the chest. "A list?" I asked quietly. "Yeah," he laughed, and his friends cackled in the background. No car, no big house, no fancy job title, no high life, just watches and contentment. Cute, but kind of sad. I froze. My breath caught halfway in my throat. My workshop, my passion, my entire way of living reduced to a punchline. My silence gave him confidence. He went on twisting the knife. "You're not a prize, Katrina. You're a project. And honestly, I don't have the time or energy for projects anymore." The laughter on the other end was merciless. I could almost see their sneers, their mocking eyes. My life, my choices, my love, my years with him were entertainment for strangers. My hand trembled not from rage, but from something colder, a realization. I didn't fight back. I didn't cry or beg. Instead, I placed the phone down on the workbench and ended the call without a word. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was mine. The trench watch lay under my lamp, its gears half exposed, waiting for me to bring it back to life. My hands, once steady, shook as I picked up my tools again, but as I adjusted the tiny spring, something inside me hardened. I wasn't just fixing a watch anymore, I was fixing myself. For the first time in years, I understood something. Daniel's voice, that smug, cruel laughter, wasn't just the sound of a breakup. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. And in that silence, another door was waiting for me to open. The morning after Daniel's cruel call, the apartment felt suffocating. The air was heavy, as if the words he had spit at me had seeped into the walls overnight. I moved quietly around the kitchen, making coffee the way I always did, precise, measured calm. But inside, I was bracing for a storm. Daniel emerged from the bedroom, still smelling faintly of last night's alcohol. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, but his expression was strangely composed, almost rehearsed. He put his phone down with a dramatic sigh. "Katrina, we need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. I stirred my coffee, letting the silence stretch until he grew uncomfortable. Finally, I looked up. "Okay." He folded his arms, adopting the posture of a man delivering a business pitch. "This isn't working anymore. You're just too comfortable, too content. And I need more. I want more." The words weren't a surprise. He had been slipping away for months, climbing a ladder that never seemed to touch the ground. Still hearing them out loud carved something deep inside me. I said nothing. He mistook my calmness for weakness and pressed on. I've met someone, Sophia. She's brilliant. She runs her own startup. She travels. She knows what she wants. She gets it. She's everything you're not. He paused, waiting for the explosion, the tears, the begging, the fury. I saw it in his eyes, that smug anticipation. But it never came. Instead, I sipped my coffee and placed the cup down gently. All right. His jaw tightened. He wasn't expecting that. That's all you have to say. What else is there? I asked, my voice calm, flat. You've made your decision. I stood the chair legs, scraping softly against the tile. Then I walked past him into the bedroom. I pulled out a duffel bag from the closet and began folding clothes with the same precision I used in my workshop. Daniel followed me, his frustration simmering. You're just going to leave like that. I didn't look up. You said you don't have time for projects. I'm respecting your schedule. He scoffed, incredulous. Don't you want to fight for this? For me. That made me pause. I finally met his eyes, and for the first time in months, I saw him clearly, not as the man I had loved for 6 years, but as a stranger dressed in ambition and arrogance. No, I said quietly, because love shouldn't feel like a competition, or a list of assets and liabilities. His face twisted anger breaking through his cool facade, but I turned away, slipping the last of my essentials into the bag. Before I left, I paused by the workbench in my little workshop. Dozens of watches sat in neat rows, each one in different stages of repair. My fingers hovered over them, uncertain. Then I picked up one particular piece, a fractured trench watch, whose glass face was cracked right down the middle. I turned it over in my hand, the gears stubbornly refusing to align. Daniel once told me it wasn't worth the effort to fix that some things were just beyond saving. I whispered under my breath. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. Slipping the watch into my bag, I walked out of the bedroom. Daniel stood in the hallway, disbelief written all over him. You'll regret this, he spat, his voice rising now that he realized he couldn't control the ending. I pulled the strap of the duffel higher onto my shoulder. My voice was steady, almost gentle. Maybe. But at least the regret will be mine, not yours. And with that, I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The apartment behind me was still buzzing with his anger, but as the door clicked shut, all I felt was silence. Heavy, yes, but mine. For the first time in 6 years, my hands weren't shaking. I moved out that same day. The duffel bag in my hand felt heavier than its contents, but lighter than the years I had carried with Daniel. My best friend Marina opened her door before I could even knock. She had known me long enough to recognize the look on my face. No questions, no judgment. Just a hug and the words, "You can stay as long as you need." Her spare room was small, just enough for a bed, a desk, and a few boxes of my essentials. Gone was my cozy workshop, the heart of my old life. In its place was a quiet ache like a phantom limb. But silence. Real silence has a way of healing. There were no more sarcastic sighs, no mocking laughter, bleeding through phone calls, no lectures about ambition. Just Marina's soft humming from the kitchen, the occasional bark of her dog, and the comforting sound of my tools clicking late into the night. I made a decision I would disappear. The first step was practical. I changed my number. Then I deactivated every social media account. No dramatic farewell post, no cryptic quotes. I simply vanished from the feeds of people who once believed they had the right to measure my worth. I became a ghost. But I didn't vanish from myself. In the quiet, I began to build again. Not a relationship, not an image, but a life. I listed a few of my restored watches online, half expecting no one to care. To my surprise, orders trickled in, then more. Soon I had clients waiting weeks for a custom restoration. Every sale, every email from a satisfied client was a small flame in the dark. I was still me. I was still good at something. Maybe I didn't have what Daniel's list demanded: a luxury car, a high-rise apartment, a glamorous job, but I had something he couldn't touch: purpose. Meanwhile, news of Daniel's new life traveled through the inevitable gossip chain. Marina couldn't help but share the tidbits, her eyes always searching my face for a reaction. Did you hear, she asked one night over takeout. Daniel and Sophia just got back from Paris. Business class flights, fancy hotels, the works. She's posting like crazy. I only shrugged, stabbing at my noodles with chopsticks. Good for them. But inside, I wondered, how long could that kind of fire burn before it consumed everything? Marina leaned back, arms crossed. People who climb too fast often fall the hardest, you know. Her words lingered long after we finished dinner. I didn't admit it out loud, but I could already feel the shift in the air. Daniel had always been hungry for more. But hunger doesn't end when the plate is full. It grows consuming everything around it. Sophia might think she was feeding it, but eventually she'd discover the truth. Daniel's appetite wasn't for success. It was for validation. And validation never lasts. At night, as I worked under the yellow glow of my lamp, I sometimes caught myself thinking about the list. That stupid, cruel list he and his friends made. The things I didn't have. But as the gears and the watches clicked into place, as broken springs found new rhythm, I realized something. I didn't need their list. I was writing my own. And every tick of the watches I restored whispered the same truth. Some things are worth mending, and others are worth leaving broken. It started as whispers. Marina would come home from work with that look, the one that said she wasn't sure if she should tell me, but couldn't help herself. Word is, Sophia's company isn't doing as well as she pretends she said one evening, tossing her bag onto the couch. Investors are pulling out. Apparently the visionary is running out of vision. I nodded, barely looking up from the tiny cog I was polishing. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. Weeks passed and the gossip grew darker. The lavish dinners and designer bags disappeared from Sophia's social media. The glossy travel photos stopped. In their place were long, motivational posts about resilience and the grind. Marina showed me one on her phone, smirking. Translation, they're broke. I didn't smile. I only set down my tools and said quietly, it was bound to happen. Daniel's role in all this became clearer as time went on. He wasn't the successful partner he had painted himself to be. He was a leech. While Sophia scrambled to save her collapsing startup, he drained her credit cards, paraded her around at events, and demanded she support him in every way. When she refused, he called her toxic, ungrateful. He turned her into what I once was, an unpaid assistant, a convenient backdrop to his performance. The irony was bitter. And then just as quickly as he had latched onto her, he was gone. One day Daniel vanished from Sophia's world. No calls, no explanations. He blocked her on everything, leaving her with debts, unpaid bills, and an empty apartment. Marina relayed the story to me over coffee, her voice low with satisfaction. He left her the same way he left you, like she was disposable. Only this time he didn't find a new Sophia. He just disappeared. I stirred my cup slowly, listening to the gentle swirl of liquid. My face remained calm, but inside I felt a strange mix of emotions. Not joy, not vindication, something quieter, like standing on the shore watching a storm pass. Because by then my own storm had passed. My little watchmaking business had grown almost without me realizing. Orders stacked up, clients returned, and word spread. I wasn't rich, not by Daniel's impossible standards, but I was steady, independent, respected in my small circle. At night, I worked late into the hours, the sound of ticking surrounding me like a heartbeat. Daniel's world was collapsing. Mine was beginning. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running behind him. I wasn't chasing, wasn't competing. I was ahead in a race I never wanted to run. The first attempt didn't come from Daniel himself. It came through Sarah, a mutual friend who had always floated between us. One evening, as I was finishing up a custom repair, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. The message was short. Hey, Katrina, it's Sarah. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but Daniel's not doing well. He really needs to talk to you. I stared at the text for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but in the end, I pressed delete. A week later, another message. Please just be the bigger person. He regrets everything. This time, I didn't even open it. But Daniel wasn't one to give up easily, especially when he had nothing left to lose. The call came late on a Tuesday night. The number was unknown, but something in me answered anyway. Katrina. The voice on the other end was thin, cracked. Gone was the confident sneer I remembered. It sounded like a man, half drowned, clinging to the last bit of air. It's me, please, I need to talk to you. I sat in silence listening. I was an idiot. Sophia was a mistake. Everything was a mistake. I miss our life. I miss your quiet. I miss you. My hand tightened around the phone, but my face stayed calm, blank. His words washed over me, carrying no weight. I have to go, I said softly and ended the call. The calls didn't stop. Different numbers, different excuses, but always the same desperate plea. Please, Katrina, just 5 minutes. Please. I blocked each one, until one gray Saturday afternoon, when the past walked right into the cafe where I sat. I was meeting a client, a kind man who had commissioned a deep blue 1950s wristwatch for his anniversary. The watch gleamed under the cafe lights as I explained its history. It was one of my proudest restorations. And then like a shadow, he appeared. Daniel. He stood in the doorway, thinner pale, his expensive clothes now ill-fitting and worn. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. For a moment his face lit up hope, sparking in the ruins. Katrina, he breathed, almost a whisper, as if saying my name might pull me back into his orbit. My client looked between us, confused. I excused myself, standing as Daniel approached. Up close, he was even worse. The arrogance was gone, stripped away. What remained was hollow, desperate. Katrina, he said again, voice trembling. Can we talk, please? I looked at him. Really looked at him. This was not the man who once mocked me, who made lists of my shortcomings with his friends. This was a ghost of him, broken, unraveling. Daniel, I said calmly, there's nothing to talk about. His eyes widened, panic seeping in. Yes, there is. I know I was wrong. I let those people get in my head. Sophia used me. She destroyed me. I see it now. I miss what we had. Our quiet life, your patience, the way you made me feel like I mattered. I need that again. I need you. His voice cracked, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw the boy I once loved. But it was only a flicker. Because standing there in that cafe with my client, waiting patiently at the counter, I realized something. The man in front of me wasn't seeking love. He was seeking rescue. And I was no one's rescue anymore. For a moment, the cafe seemed to hold its breath. My client lingered near the counter, polite enough to give us space, but curious enough to watch. Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on me, wide and frantic, like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was gone. Katrina, he pleaded again, his voice cracking. I was wrong about everything. The list, Sophia, all of it. I don't care about any of that anymore. I just want you. I studied him quietly. His hands shook, his shoulders sagged. The arrogance, the mockery, the ambition that once blinded him, all gone. I remember that list, I said, finally, my voice low, steady. The one you and your friends made. A list of all the things I didn't have. He swallowed hard, guilt flashing in his eyes. You laughed at me, Daniel. You told me I wasn't a prize, just a project. You reduced 6 years of my life to a joke. I shook my head slowly. I'll never forget that. He tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand, stopping him cold. You were right about one thing. I didn't have what was on that list. I didn't have a fancy car, or a big house, or a glamorous career. And you know what? I still don't. I took a step closer, my voice soft but cutting. But you, Daniel, your list is longer now than mine ever was. You don't have a partner. You don't have a home. You don't have respect, trust, or peace. You burned through all of it. And the saddest part, you don't even have yourself anymore. His lips trembled. Katrina, please. No, my voice was final, calm. You made your choice, and I made mine. For a long second, we just stood there, the weight of 6 years pressing down like a storm. But for me, it wasn't heavy anymore. It was air, clean, sharp, and freeing. I turned back toward my client, who was waiting patiently with the deep blue watch in his hand. His face lit up as I approached, and I smiled gently, placing the finished piece in his palm. She'll love it, I told him. It's strong enough to last a lifetime. Behind me, Daniel's voice broke once more, but I didn't turn back. His pleas faded into the hum of the cafe, blending with the clink of cups and the soft chatter of strangers. As I walked out into the gray afternoon, I slipped my hands into my coat pockets and felt the weight of the cracked trench watch I had carried all this time. The one Daniel once told me wasn't worth fixing. Maybe he was right. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. But me, I had fixed myself, piece by piece, gear by gear. I paused, letting the city noise wash over me, and whispered to myself, I may be content, but contentment is gold, and some lists are worth burning. And with that, I walked on free, steady, and untouchable. My name is Brenda Whitehead, and I'm 29 years old. If you had asked me a year ago what my life would look like now, I would have painted you a picture of certainty, a house with a little garden, Sunday dinners at the table, a man by my side who made me feel secure. For so long, I believed I had all the pieces lined up. Chris and I shared an apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I can still see the dent in the wall by the front door. My clumsy attempt to wedge a bookshelf inside one rainy afternoon. Chris laughed at me for a week, then forgot it ever happened. But I never did. That dent became something I promised myself I would fix before we moved into the house we always talked about. A house. It wasn't just a dream. It felt inevitable. That's how we lived back then. Chris brought the color, and I brought the structure. I was the one with a steady job in software development, the one who tracked bills, remembered birthdays, kept our little world in motion. I didn't mind. I actually liked being the anchor. Chris was the free spirit. That's what he called himself, an ocean that could not be contained. At first it charmed me. He'd wake me at 2 in the morning, insisting we drive out to the lake just to watch the stars. He'd spend entire weekends painting, disappearing into canvases splattered with colors I couldn't name. He'd book trips on a whim and convince me with just a grin to follow. I thought we balanced each other perfectly. He pulled me into chaos. I gave him stability. For years that dance worked, but lately I could feel the rhythm breaking. Chris's spontaneity wasn't charming anymore, it was an excuse. He'd vanish for nights, not answering calls, coming home smelling of beer and smoke. His texts got shorter, sharper. Whenever I asked what was wrong, he'd roll his eyes, wave a dismissive hand, and mutter, "Brenda, you overthink everything. Can't you just let things be?" That answer used to sting. Now it chilled me. Because I realized something I wasn't overthinking. I was seeing what was right in front of me. The warmth between us had thinned to a ghost of itself. The man I used to fall asleep beside now felt like a stranger in the same bed. The dent in the wall near the door, once a silly memory, had started to look like a warning. A crack I ignored until one day the whole foundation would crumble. I tried to shake it off. We'd been through rough patches before, but each night the silence grew heavier like fog filling the apartment. I cooked dinner. He came home late. I asked about his day. He answered with a shrug. I suggested a weekend trip. He said he was too busy, then disappeared again. And still, I clung to the idea that stability could save us, that if I just stayed steady, Chris would come back to himself. But deep down, a question started to claw at me. What if he didn't want to come back? The first time suspicion truly took root was subtle. One evening, Chris stepped out onto the balcony to take a call. I wasn't eavesdropping, but the walls were thin. His voice was soft, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me in months. He laughed an easy, unguarded laugh that made my stomach knot. When he came back in, I asked who was that. He shrugged, pouring himself a drink. Just a friend. I wanted to press, but the hard look in his eyes warned me off. He was daring me to challenge him, and I didn't have the strength. Not yet. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was already losing him. Not to distance, not to stress, but to someone else. Late one night, lying awake while Chris snored beside me, I thought about that dent in the wall again. I remembered how frustrated I'd been when I first made it, how I promised myself I'd fix it before we moved. And yet here we were, months later, the dent still there. A flaw I walked past every day, pretending it didn't matter. What if my relationship was just like that wall? Something broken. I kept telling myself yet I'd repair, even as it deepened into something unfixable. The thought stayed with me, heavy and unrelenting. Then came the moment I couldn't ignore anymore. I was at work when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus, a colleague who rarely texted me outside office hours. Attached was a screenshot. A photo of Chris taken at a crowded bar, his head tilted back in laughter, his arm draped around a woman's shoulder. A caption overlaid. Finally found a soul that speaks my language. The woman was Maya, a friend of ours, or so I thought. She had been orbiting Chris for months, a self-proclaimed poet with an endless stream of deep Instagram posts. Chris had mentioned her more and more lately, praising her brilliance, her energy. I brushed it off as harmless admiration. Until that moment. I stared at the picture, the bracelet on Chris's wrist catching the light. My bracelet, the one I had given him for his birthday. The room spun around me. Marcus's text followed. I thought you should see this before it gets worse. I didn't reply. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. Instead, a numbness washed over me, the kind that hollows you out, leaves you standing there like a shell. Because in that instant, the truth was undeniable. Chris wasn't drifting. He wasn't lost in his art. He wasn't struggling through a rough patch. He was already gone. And he hadn't even bothered to tell me. The next few days blurred into each other. I went through the motions at work, smiled when spoken to, answered emails. But at night, lying awake in the apartment that felt less and less like mine, the hollow truth echoed louder. The dent in the wall by the door was the first crack. This photo was the flood. And deep inside, I knew the collapse was coming. When the first photo surfaced, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just a bad angle, a friendly moment taken out of context. Chris was impulsive, affectionate with friends. Surely it wasn't what it looked like. But lies have a way of collapsing under their own weight. A week later, another screenshot found its way to me, this time without any ambiguity. It was Maya again. A close-up this time. Her hand laced with Chris's, their fingers tangled like roots that had been growing for a long time. On her wrist was the bracelet I'd given him. On his face, the kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. The caption was worse than the image finally found my soulmate. The kind of love you can't fake. My heart clenched, then went strangely still. I couldn't even summon rage, just a deep, sick hollowness. Like realizing the person you've been sleeping beside has already been replaced and you were the last one to notice. That night I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted to see if he would tell me the truth. I wanted to know if there was still a sliver of decency left in him. So I waited. The clock ticked past 11 when the sound of keys scraping at the lock finally broke the silence. The door creaked open. Chris stumbled in, humming a tune under his breath, smelling faintly of cheap beer and perfume that wasn't mine. He tossed his keys onto the little table by the door. The sound echoed in the quiet apartment like a gunshot. I was already sitting on the couch, lights off, just the pale glow of the street lamp painting my face in shadows. His humming stopped when his eyes adjusted and he saw me. "Oh," he said, startled. His voice tightened. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I answered evenly. Couldn't sleep. Chris hesitated, then sauntered into the living room, dropping onto the far end of the couch. 10 feet of space stretched between us, wider than any ocean he liked to compare himself to. The silence pressed down, heavy, unrelenting. Finally, I asked, "Is everything okay, Chris?" He let out a long theatrical sigh, the kind that always made me feel small. "Brenda, what's with you lately? You're so heavy, always serious." I kept my voice calm, though my hands trembled in my lap. I just asked a question. He finally turned his head. His eyes weren't soft. They were cold, resigned, like someone who'd already chosen their path. "Look, I can't do this anymore," he said. His tone was flat cruel in its finality. "You're safe, predictable. That's not what I want. I need passion, excitement, and honestly, you don't have that in you." The words should have broken me. A month ago, maybe they would have. But tonight, they just confirmed what I already knew. I stared at him, really seeing him, this man who had once promised me forever, now sitting there discarding me like yesterday's news. "And who gives you this excitement?" I asked softly. "Is it Maya?" For a flicker of a second, his face betrayed him. Shock, panic. Then just as quickly, arrogance slid back into place. He smirked. "She understands me," he said, voice swelling with self-righteousness. "She's wild, an artist, everything you're not." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed level. "And she's your muse." His eyes widened. He hadn't expected me to know. For a moment, his bravado cracked. But then he leaned forward, lips curling into a cruel smile. "You're not a good person, Brenda," he sneered. "A good person would be happy for me. Happy that I found my soulmate." The words hit harder than any slap. Not because they were true, they weren't, but because of the audacity. He had betrayed me, humiliated me, replaced me, and now he was twisting the knife, framing my pain as proof of my own failure. For a long moment, the silence between us was unbearable. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock, the distant rumble of traffic outside, even the rush of blood in my ears. I stood up slowly, not trusting myself to speak. Chris frowned. "What are you doing?" I walked into the bedroom and pulled a bag from the closet. My laptop, my wallet, a few changes of clothes. The essentials. When I returned, he was still on the couch, confusion giving way to panic. "Brenda," he said sharply, "don't be dramatic. I just told you what's going on. We can talk about this later." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, zipping the bag. My voice was steady, almost eerily calm. "You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked to the door. "Wait!" His voice rose, tinged with desperation now. "You can't just leave. Not like this." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "I hope you and your soulmate have a wonderful life together," I said quietly. Then I stepped out, closing the door behind me. The click of the latch was final. Behind me, I left the silence, the dent in the wall, and the man who had taught me what betrayal really feels like. I didn't look back. The night I left Chris, I carried only one bag. It was light, but the weight pressing on my chest was crushing. I had given years of my life to him, and all I took with me were clothes, my laptop, and a passport. Everything else stayed behind the furniture. I picked the curtains, I sewed, even the dent in the wall that had once felt like a harmless joke. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. For the first few weeks, I slept on my friend Nadia's couch. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a blanket and a pillow the night I showed up at her door. Her quiet kindness was exactly what I needed. The silence in her apartment was different from the silence with Chris. It wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was soft, healing. I could breathe again. I threw myself into work. At the office, I was the first to arrive, the last to leave. My manager, David, noticed the change. Instead of asking, he let me channel everything into projects. I built new frameworks, cleaned old code, fixed problems that had been sitting untouched for months. My work became a lifeline, something steady when the rest of my life felt like shifting sand. At night, exhaustion replaced sorrow. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. But recovery is never a straight line. Every so often, I would wake in Nadia's spare room with the phantom memory of Chris's laugh in my ears, or I'd reach for my phone expecting a text from him. Then I'd remember he wasn't mine to expect anything from anymore. That thought hurt less each day. Pain dulled, then hardened into resolve. After a month, I signed the lease on a small one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't much a cracked tile in the bathroom, a stubborn window that refused to stay open, but it was mine, entirely mine. I painted the walls pale green, strung fairy lights across the balcony, and bought a plant I had no idea how to take care of. For the first time, I felt the thrill of building a space without compromise. No one else's taste, no one else's chaos. Just mine. I hung shelves carefully, making sure nothing would leave another dent. I told myself this home would carry no hidden cracks, no quiet warnings ignored. Meanwhile, the world reminded me of Chris in fragments I couldn't control. Through friends of friends, I heard whispers about him and Maya. They were everywhere: coffee shops, art shows, parties. They had become the couple people couldn't stop watching, parading their soulmate romance like a badge of honor. Once Nadia hesitantly showed me a post Maya had uploaded, Chris' arms wrapped around her, her caption dripping with poetry about passion and truth. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not with jealousy, not even with anger. With pity. Because I knew him. I knew the cracks he hid behind charm, the irresponsibility he wrapped in freedom. He wasn't a soulmate. He was a storm, and storms don't stop just because they change the coastline they hit. My life, in contrast, grew quieter, steadier. I signed up for the gym, started running again. I read books before bed instead of waiting for Chris to stumble home. I learned how to enjoy my own company. Some nights, though, when the apartment was too still, doubt crept back in. What if Chris was right? What if I wasn't passionate enough, exciting enough? What if predictability was all I had to offer? Those thoughts gnawed at me until I remembered his words. You're not a good person. A good person would be happy for me. And suddenly the absurdity of it hit me all over again. The cruelty of blaming me for his betrayal. Each time I replayed that moment, my spine straightened a little more. My resolve deepened. Still, a part of me knew the story wasn't finished. Chris and Maya's whirlwind romance felt too fragile, too performative to last. I didn't need to interfere. Time would do it for me. And when it did, I had a feeling Chris would come looking for me. That thought used to terrify me. Now it only made me stronger. One evening, after a long day at work, I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the dark. The air smelled of rain. My apartment was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. For the first time in a long while, I felt a strange, tentative joy. I wasn't the woman waiting by the door for someone to come home anymore. I was the woman who had walked away and was still standing. And in the silence, I promised myself I would never let anyone make me doubt my worth again. Whispers of Chris's new life reached me slowly, like echoes carried through strangers. Nadia's friends, co-workers, who moved in the same downtown circles, even a few old acquaintances I never sought out the news, but somehow it found me. At first it sounded like they were invincible. Chris and Maya were the it couple of the scene. People gushed about their wild parties, their late-night poetry readings, their endless energy. They posted photos of themselves draped across coffee shop couches at gallery openings, dancing barefoot in the rain. From the outside, it looked like freedom, passion. Everything Chris had thrown in my face the night he left me. But I knew better. I knew storms when I saw them. The cracks started to show within a few months. It began online. Maya's ex-girlfriend posted something cryptic on Instagram, a line about being a muse for a season discarded for a lifetime. She didn't mention Chris, but the comments section filled in the blanks. One by one, other women added their voices, different names, same story. Chris had a pattern, charm, intensity, devotion, followed by abandonment when the next muse came along. Reading those words, I felt a pang of recognition. Not sorrow, not longing, recognition. Because I had lived that story too. Soon after, rumors about money started swirling. Chris's so-called art career wasn't paying the bills. He was borrowing from friends, leaving tabs unpaid at bars, leaning heavily on Maya's income from teaching part-time workshops. His charisma had always carried him, but charm doesn't settle rent. And then came the spectacle that felt like deja vu. One evening, Nadia shoved her phone into my hands. You need to see this. It was a public post from Chris, his words written with his trademark flair for dramatics. Sometimes the soul must wander. Sometimes we must leave behind love, no matter how real, in order to grow. Maya was my fire, but fires burn out. I found a new light, a new beginning. The photos attached showed him with another woman, younger, smiling wide, his hand tangled in hers the way it once tangled in mine. The comments exploded beneath the posts, some praising his honesty, others tearing him apart. Maya hadn't responded publicly, but within hours, she posted a blurry black and white photo of herself with the caption, "Losing pieces of myself I thought were permanent." My chest tightened as I read it, not because I wanted Chris back, not because I still loved him, but because I remembered exactly what it felt like to be in her place. For days afterward, I caught myself wondering, did she see the truth about him sooner than I had? Or did she ignore the warning signs, too convincing herself the storm was just passion? It didn't matter. The outcome was the same. Chris hadn't found his soulmate. He'd found his mirror. One night, while cleaning my apartment, I stumbled across the old bracelet box, the one I had given him. Empty now, of course. He'd worn it in that photo with Maya, and who knew where it was now? I held the box in my hands and let the memories rush over me. His grin, the night I gave it to him. The way he'd promised forever, the way he'd said, "You ground me, Brenda. You're my anchor." All words, all lies. I closed the box and set it back on the shelf. It was no longer a symbol of loss, but of release. Around this time, my career began to shift upward. David, my manager, pulled me aside after a successful presentation and said, "You've been on fire lately. I think you're ready for something bigger." For the first time, I realized he was right. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Meanwhile, Chris was imploding. Mutual friends whispered that he had been blacklisted from a few galleries after too many drunken outbursts. His debts were piling up. Maya had moved out of their shared loft, her trust in him shattered. And Chris. He was seen less and less until he became a shadow of the man who once called himself an ocean. I should have felt vindicated, and maybe part of me did. But mostly I felt nothing. That was the strangest part. The man who had once consumed my world, who had broken me open with his betrayal, was unraveling, and I couldn't summon more than distant pity. Because the truth was simple, I had already left him behind. Yet a quiet unease lingered. I knew Chris. He wasn't the type to vanish gracefully. His ego wouldn't let him. Sooner or later, when the dust settled, he would look for me. And when that moment came, I would need to be ready. Not with tears, not with anger, but with the strength to face him without flinching. It started with a text. My phone buzzed one evening as I was rinsing dishes. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey, just saw a picture of our old coffee shop. Hope you're doing well." No name, but I didn't need one. My chest tightened. I deleted it without responding. 2 days later, another message. "I'm sorry for how things ended. I wasn't myself back then." This one I didn't delete right away. I stared at it until the words blurred. I wasn't myself. No. He had been exactly himself, selfish, reckless, cruel. I closed the screen and shoved the phone into a drawer. But Chris wasn't done. The messages kept coming. They swung wildly in tone, casual, apologetic, nostalgic, desperate. "Remember that trip to the lake? I can't stop thinking about it. You're the only one who ever truly understood me. I made a mistake. Please, just one chance to talk." Each ping of my phone felt like an echo from a past I'd buried. I didn't reply, not once. But silence, I would soon learn, only made him louder. The calls began next. When I didn't answer, he recruited others. One afternoon, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months, Emily, one of Chris's closest friends. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Brenda," she said quickly, "I know you don't want to hear from me, but I'm worried about Chris. He's in a bad place. He misses you." I bit my tongue, fighting the old instinct to soothe, to fix. "Emily, I'm sorry he's struggling, but that's not my responsibility anymore." She pressed harder, her tone softening into persuasion. "He knows he messed up. He says you were the only real thing he ever had. Can't you just talk to him as a friend?" My pulse thudded in my ears. I closed my eyes, picturing Chris's smug face the night he told me I wasn't a good person. That memory anchored me. "No," I said firmly. "If you're truly his friend, tell him to find help on his own. I can't be that for him." Before she could argue, I hung up. Days later, Nadia warned me. "He's circling," she said. A few people told me he's asking about you. He's not letting go. I nodded, even though a cold knot twisted in my stomach. I thought I was ready for this, but hearing his name out loud again, hearing that he was searching for me, made old scars itch. Then came the call I wasn't expecting, from my mother. "Brenda," she said hesitantly. "Chris called me." My heart lurched. What? He said he made a terrible mistake, that he still loves you. He sounded so broken, honey. I thought maybe you should just talk to him for closure. The betrayal stung more than I expected, not from Chris, but from her, my own mother unknowingly becoming his pawn. "Mom," I said quietly but firmly, "I need you to hear me. I am fine. I've moved on. Chris is not my responsibility. Please don't ever ask me to go back there." She went quiet, then sighed. "You're right. He sounded so lost." I swallowed hard. That's not my problem anymore. Still, Chris wasn't finished. One evening, an unknown number flashed on my phone. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Brenda," his voice rasped, raw and broken. "Please, I need to see you. I made a mistake. She used me. Everything I said before, it was a lie. I was stupid. Please, just talk to me." The sound of his desperation should have cracked me. Once it would have. But instead, all I felt was a wave of clarity. "No," I said simply, "I have nothing to say to you." "Brenda, please." I hung up. The silence after that click was deafening, but it wasn't heavy. It was liberating. For the first time, I realized I no longer feared Chris's hold on me. He could text, call, beg, manipulate, none of it mattered. Because he wasn't part of my life anymore. And he never would be again. The night of the gala, I felt like I was stepping into a different life. My life. The venue shimmered with lights, glass chandeliers scattering gold across the room. Colleagues congratulated me. Glasses clinked in toasts. My promotion had finally been announced. For years, I had been the quiet worker, the dependable one. Tonight, I stood at the center, recognized and celebrated. At my side was Daniel, my new partner. Steady, warm, quietly confident. He wasn't a poet or a dreamer. He didn't paint grand illusions with words. But he listened, he noticed, he showed up. And in his presence, I felt something I hadn't realized I'd been starving for safety without suffocation. We were laughing together when the laughter froze in my throat. Across the crowded room, I saw him. Chris. For a moment, I thought I was imagining him. The once carefree man was unrecognizable. His clothes were wrinkled, his posture slumped, his face hollowed by nights of regret and self-destruction. Our eyes met. His widened raw with desperation, and then he started walking toward me. Daniel noticed the shift in my body. "Everything okay?" he murmured. "Yes," I said, steadying myself. "It will be." Chris reached us, his gaze darting between Daniel and me. For a flicker of a second, I saw envy flash in his eyes, sharp and bitter. Then his attention locked onto me. "Brenda," he whispered, voice cracking. "Please, I need to talk to you, alone." I held his gaze calm. "We're having a conversation," I said, gesturing to Daniel. "There's nothing left to say." His panic swelled. "Please," he said louder, drawing stares from nearby guests. "I was wrong. I was so stupid. She wasn't who I thought she was. I want to start over. With you. We can fix this." The room seemed to shrink, everyone's attention brushing against us like static. My chest tightened, but not from fear, from clarity. He reached out, fingers trembling as if to touch my arm. I stepped back. And then in the calmest voice I'd ever heard come out of my own mouth, I answered. "Chris." I began quiet, but unyielding. "I don't know who you are anymore. The man I loved, the one I built a life with, he's gone. And the one standing in front of me, he's a stranger." His face crumpled. "No, Brenda. It's still me. I can be that man again." I shook my head. "That man wasn't real. He was a mask you wore until you found someone else to play with. You told me I wasn't a good person because I couldn't celebrate your betrayal. Do you remember that?" He froze, shame flickering in his eyes. "That night," I continued, "you broke something in me. And I thought it was permanent. But it wasn't. It was a beginning. Without you, I built something stronger. A life I love. A life where peace isn't fragile and love isn't a performance." I glanced at Daniel, whose steady presence anchored me. Then I looked back at Chris. "In this life," I said firmly, "there is no place for you. There never will be." The words seemed to drain him. His shoulders sagged, his mouth opened and closed like a man drowning. For once, he had no poetry left. "Brenda, please," he choked. "Just give me one more chance. We could start fresh." I stepped past him, my hand finding Daniel's. "No, Chris. My fresh start already happened. And you're not in it." Together, Daniel and I walked away. I didn't turn back, but I could feel it, the weight of his stare, the silence that wrapped around him as the crowd moved on, leaving him stranded in his own wreckage. For years, Chris had been the storm that consumed me. Tonight, he was nothing more than a shadow in the rearview mirror. The last image I holds of him is not of the man I once loved, but of the emptiness he became. And for the first time, the silence inside me wasn't loneliness. It was peace.